Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Abraham Lincoln, and the focus is Path to Politics. The year is 1832. Lincoln's 23 years old. He's trying to find his way in life. He's living in New Salem, Illinois, and he gets an opportunity to maybe pursue the law. It was a lawyer named the name of John Stuart who encouraged Lincoln, who was always interested in self-learning. Well, why don't you do it in a particular direction? Focus on the law. I'll make my extensive law library available to you. Lincoln said yes. He would take books out and he would study in a somewhat unusual way, according to Henry McHenry, who was one of his neighbors, who said that he used to read law barefooted, seated in the shade of a tree just opposite Berry's grocery. He'd grind around with the shade, occasionally varying his attitude by lying flat on his back and putting his feet up the tree. Typical sort of slovenly Abraham Lincoln all the way through his law studies. Well, while he was learning the law, he was also being encouraged by his friends to go into politics, run for the state legislature. Well, Lincoln had expressed some interest in this before going off to the Black Hawk War. He had then come back, and now the election's only a couple of weeks away, and Lincoln decides to give it a shot. He hits the stump and says, "Gentlemen and fellow citizens, I presume you all know who I am. I am humble, Abraham Lincoln. My politics are short and sweet, like the old woman's dance. I'm in favor of a national bank. I'm in favor of the internal improvement system and a high protective tariff. These are my sentiments and political principles. If elected, I shall be thankful. If not, it will all be the same." That was pretty typical of Lincoln. Well, kind of a decent showing. It was a crowded field. He finished 8th. Only the top 4 were elected, so no election this time, but it was a start. Now, Lincoln was clearly aligned with Henry Clay's American system and the Whig Party. These were the things that he expressed his belief in, which was a good thing because most of his constituents were as well. So a couple years later, he runs again for the state legislature. He's even more popular in town. He finished 2nd out of 13 at the age of 25. He is now in his first political office. Lincoln, again, typically unkempt in his appearance, said, "You know what? I better change this." He borrowed some money, bought his first suit, headed off to Vandalia, the state capital. Took the stage. It was about 100 miles away. It only took him 34 hours to get there. Well, Lincoln, despite being young and politically inexperienced, he was popular amongst his fellow legislators. They loved hearing his stories, which again were typical, the anecdotes that he would share and the humor that he would share. He got involved 10 different committees over the 10 weeks of the legislative session. After that, it was back to New Salem, some odd jobs, still studying the law. Well, the next time Lincoln was reelected, a pretty important topic was on the table, and personally important to Lincoln. It was the topic of moving the state capital out of Vandalia to somewhere else. And Lincoln was part of the group pushing Springfield. Sure enough, the capital moved, and so did Lincoln. In 1837, he moved to Springfield, and it would become his home for the rest of his life. Showed up, clothes on his back, whatever he could carry in his saddlebags, that was it. Again, still incredibly poor. He goes to Ellis's General Store to buy some bedding, which he clearly couldn't afford. And he meets the co-owner of the store, a young man by the name of Joshua Speed, who felt sorry for Lincoln and said, "Look, do you have a place to stay?" Lincoln said no. He actually invited him in to share his room above the store. He and Speed would be friends for the rest of their lives. Lincoln passed the bar, and he was welcomed into a partnership by John Stuart, the man who had encouraged him in the first place, brings Lincoln in as his junior partner. Lincoln continued as a state legislator as well, and he made his first public remarks about slavery, specifically about abolition, something he did not support. Lincoln and fellow legislator Dan Stone made the following statement: "The Congress of the United States has no power under the Constitution to interfere with the institution of slavery in the different states. The institution of slavery is founded on both injustice and bad policy, but that the promulgation of abolition doctrines tends rather to increase than to abate its evils." Slavery to Lincoln, a moral evil, but he was no abolitionist. In fact, like most at the time, thought abolition was a problem, not a solution. Well, his partner John Stuart was elected to the United States Congress in 1838, so Lincoln actually took over the firm, not now only doing local cases, but also riding the circuit. Lincoln brought a sense of morality to the legal profession, and he expressed it when he said to discourage litigation. Persuade your neighbors to compromise whenever you can. As a peacemaker, the lawyer has a superior opportunity of being a good man. There will still be business enough. Never stir up litigation. A worse man can scarcely be found than one who does this. Resolve to be honest at all events, and if you, in your judgment, you cannot be an honest lawyer, resolved to be honest without being a lawyer. Honest Old Abe, reinforcing how he got that nickname. He would often turn down cases if he felt his client was guilty or maybe this lawsuit was excessive, did plenty of pro bono cases. This was part of the core of Abraham Lincoln. Well, in 1838, January of that year, Lincoln gave his first major political address at the Young Men's Lyceum in Springfield. The topic was called the perpetuation of our political institutions. And the focus was actually sort of about the rule of law and mob violence. He was reacting to a recent case where a black man had been beaten by a mob in St. Louis, and Lincoln decried this. This was a scourge that was spreading across the country. What did Lincoln propose? Well, the answer is simple. Let every American, every lover of liberty, every well-wisher to his posterity swear by the blood of the Revolution never to violate in the least particular the laws of the country, and never to tolerate their violation by others. Let every man remember that to violate the law is to trample on the blood of his father and to tear the character of his own and his children's liberty. In short, let it become the political religion of the nation, and let the old and the young, the rich and the poor, the grave and the gay, of all sexes and tongues and colors and conditions, sacrifice unceasingly upon its altars the simple eloquence of Abraham Lincoln on a powerful topic. But those are words that we're going to have to revisit a little bit when he becomes president of the United States. Well, Lincoln had a couple of more terms in the state legislature. He also stumped for the Whig candidate for president in 1840, which was William Henry Harrison, who won that race. Stuart was reelected to Congress that year, so they dissolved that law firm, and he started up a new partnership with a former circuit court judge, Stephen Logan. This was in the early 1840s. That one didn't last all that long before he signed up his own junior partner. So Lincoln's now the senior partner of a small two-person firm where William Billy Herndon became his junior partner, and Herndon would become a mainstay in Lincoln's life for the rest of his life. Decided also to move in a different direction politically. No more state legislature. Lincoln wanted to run for Congress, but a couple of his friends were also in the running. John Hardin, Edward Baker. All three were running, and Hardin was eventually elected. But the Whigs believed in this concept of rotation in office. So one-term representatives was the norm at the time. So Hardin served his 2 years. Edward Baker served 2 years, and then in 1848, it was Lincoln's term. He was elected to the United States Congress. He took himself a one-term pledge, so it was going to be a 2-year stint. He was quickly off to D.C., and he was going to make the most of it. He was straight to it on a particular topic that really bothered him, and it was the Mexican War, which was actually almost over. The fighting had essentially ended between the Americans and the Mexicans. It was sort of peace negotiations were underway, but the Whigs had never liked this war. Lincoln had never liked this war, in particular the way that President James Polk had started it, where he had claimed that the Mexicans had attacked the Americans on American soil. Well, to Lincoln and many others, it was not American soil. In fact, it was at best disputed land between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande, which had been disputed between Texas and Mexico really for many, many years. And Lincoln was adamant that this was disputed territory and Polk was false when he made these claims at the start of the war. So Lincoln took to the floor of the House of Representatives and said, this House desires to obtain a full knowledge of all the facts which to establish whether the particular spot of soil on which the blood of our citizens was so shed was or was not our own soil at that time. For Lincoln, the answer was no. Well, he posed 8 specific questions to President Polk. They were called his spot resolutions, focusing on that spot where the war started. And of course, the Polk administration completely ignored this freshman congressman from the West. Lincoln wasn't going to let up. The very next month, he went back on the floor and said, now I propose to try to show that the whole of this issue and evidence is from the beginning to end the sheerest deception. Let him, Polk, answer with facts and not with arguments. Let him remember he sits where Washington sat. And so remember, let him answer as Washington would answer, i.e. with the truth. Well, again, Polk ignored, and in fact, Lincoln's constituents didn't really understand why he was making such a big deal about this. The war was essentially over. It had been an American success. Kind of drop it, including Billy Herndon, his law partner, was asking, why are you pushing this? Well, Lincoln had a strong answer. Lincoln said, allow the president to invade a neighboring nation whenever he shall deem it necessary to repel an invasion, and you allow him to do so whenever he may choose to say he deems it necessary for such purpose, and you allow him to make war at pleasure. This was a warning Be wary of despotic executives. This is a topic we'll also come back to during Lincoln's presidency. Well, Lincoln did proposed one piece of legislation near the end of his term in the House to gradually abolish slavery in the District of Columbia. This did not go anywhere. He gained no traction. Lincoln voted numerous times for the Wilmot Proviso, which had been introduced many times in the House. It never passed. The idea was no expansion of slavery into any land being acquired from the war in Mexico. Again, proposed many times. Lincoln voted yes every time, but it also did not pass. Lincoln, as always, popular, gregarious in the social circles, telling his stories in Washington, and he kept busy when the House was not in session. He would often go down to the Senate, where he would listen to the great orators give their speeches, or he'd go sit in on the cases in the Supreme Court, or be off to the Library of Congress checking out some books, continuing his self-learning. His term came to an end, and true to his word, took his one-term pledge, decided not to run anymore for Congress, but certainly this was not the end of the political career of Abraham Lincoln, but that's the story for another day. That is Abraham Lincoln and the Path to Politics, from the life of Abraham Lincoln. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher. This is Presidential Chronicles.